So I grew up in an era where cannabis was not legalized in the United States, and but it was still very prominent. And myself, the communities I grew up through, the high school, things like that, a lot of us smoked weed. It's interesting now that the legalities have changed, and now instead of going to, somebody's house to buy weed, I can now go to a store pretty much anywhere in Washington or along the West Coast and purchase cannabis. And as beautiful as that is, there's still a mental struggle that I personally have and that I've talked to people about, that when you grow up hearing a story about the way things are portrayed, even if they change, it's kind of hard for us to wrap our heads around it. So today I have on Jared and Laurie Archbold to talk about creating responsible rituals around ingesting cannabis, whether for ritualistic, ceremonial reasons or for personal just consumption. We talk about how to utilize cannabis as a medicine and finding the right dosage, the right strain that works for what you're trying to accomplish. But, really how these medicines can truly support us, because along with the legality issue of cannabis now being legalized where it was illegal, there's also so many stories about the commercials that we watched. This is your brain on drugs. I learned this by watching you. Stranger danger, dare, all these things that we talk about that ended up probably causing more harm than helping with the narrative around these substances. Love this conversation with Jared and Laurie. We also touch on some beautiful topics as well. We lead this towards a beautiful conversation about polyamory. I think a lot of this relates back to how we view society, and are we dead set in our ways, or can we have wiggle room to allow the ideas of maybe the cultural values and the ideas that we now accept can be modified, can be expanded upon, can be looked at differently. So I hope you get something out of this conversation. We'll see you on the other side. But first, this message. No matter how much we prepare, the holidays tend to stress us out. So this year, take a moment to reset and recenter with a grounding retreat in Costa Rica. Join Jeff Hawkins, Steve Wimmer, Cameron Nagashima, and myself, Adam Reel, for a 1-week immersive yoga retreat at Blue Osa Resort, backed up to miles of pristine beach. Every day, you'll have an option to experience yoga, meditation, relaxation, self-discovery, adventures, or your own personal free time. This is a time to build your peaceful practices before you need them. Take this time for yourself. Visit GarudaWellness.com for details. We have pricing options available, and if you pay in full by July 1st, you receive a 20% discount. Through the experiences offered, there's a lot of different ways to build your practice and approach this retreat. Take time to create space for yourself so you can hold space for others. Reset and recenter. Visit GarudaWellness.com for more information. That's Garuda, Garuda, Wellness, WELLNESS.com. GarudaWellness.com. So just a quick note, my microphone cut out during the introduction that I was giving for Jared and Laurie, but it kicks on in about 2 minutes. So just a little bit of time with shoddy audio, and I do apologize for that, but hope you enjoyed the conversation. And now an uninterrupted podcast with Jared and Laurie Archbold. All right, welcome back to our show. Today I'm joined by two amazing guests. I love having multiple guests. It doesn't happen that often on my show, but it's just a nice practice for me as an engineer also. Like, how do I mix it all and all that stuff? So brushing off the old hat. And so today I'm joined by Jared and Laurie Archbold. We've worked together in the past. We've been together in the past in different circles and different meditation groups, sound baths, stuff like that. But it's just, for me, I love how connections kind of end up when they need to, right? And so Jared had reached out to me a couple weeks ago after coming to one of my sound baths and just wanted to get together and talk, have some coffee, kind of chit chat about life and maybe some events we could do together. And it opened up this beautiful conversation about ceremonial cannabis, about your partner Laurie, which at the time I was like, oh, I'd love to meet Laurie. And then I met Laurie. I'm like, I fucking know you.
Hi again. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And so, and this is, the subjects that we're going to kind of move between today, especially the cannabis subject, that's, I think, one of the biggest things for me personally in my own personal journey. That I've wrestled with quite a bit, and I can now understand I can't say completely, but I have a good understanding, at least within myself, that it's pretty self-induced. From the stories that I've heard over the years, and I've kind of attached narratives to these stories. And it's kind of funny because some of the other topics we'll talk about, like polyamory and things like that, also have grown with us. We're all within the similar same age range. Has grown into these connotations of like, like shadowy kind of stuff, debauchery kind of stuff, and that's, a lot of that, cannabis and sex and all this like sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of shit, right? Kind of got all lumped into this same thing about like how negative it can be and how bad it is for the body and all this, it fucks with the mind and all this stuff. But, I can honestly say as I've gotten older and been able to finally understand where I'm not thinking for myself, the plant medicines, the pleasure that you can responsibly find, and the communities that you keep are some of like the most important things in life.
Yeah.
And so, like these narratives being changed over the years is amazing, and to meet people that are in charge and part of that narrative change is even more amazing. So, long-winded intro. You guys are the best. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. So I wanted to start off by just kind of talking about like what your journeys have been, how you got into, we'll talk about the cannabis kind of realm first. But like I said in the intro, a lot of us have these jaded past with even the idea of cannabis. We have these like long-haired stoner kids, dressed all raggedy, or you have like the gang member connotations, right? There's all these caricatures, if you will, that have been placed around the ideas of drugs, if you want, very broad brushstroke name for medicines, but it's even with the legalities in certain places, it's still so cloak and dagger and just so like there's these negative kind of ideas around them. So Laurie, maybe you want to start off and just talk about like what your journey has been with your personal usage of the medicines and kind of how you rationalize it.
Yeah, I appreciate your context of like the generation that we come from. I definitely had a Burt pipe in high school that my that my older.
You might want to explain what a Burt pipe is.
Burt and Ernie.
Yeah, you gotta give some context on that one.
A pipe that had Burt on it.
I can just imagine everyone being like, "What kind of pipe?"
Burt Reynolds. Mustache?
Or like burnt or.
Yes, and that was, I think at the time, though I didn't know it, sacred to me. There was something that I was wanting to explore, but for a long story that I won't go into, that pipe was confiscated by my mother. And so, I dabbled in high school, and then it was kind of like, coming from that like conservative religious family background, and also from the era of DARE and Reagan and just this is your brain on drugs and all of that.
Man. Weren't those just insane commercials to look back on now?
I still feel fear in my body thinking
Holy
about
cow.
them. Yeah.
I learned this by watching you.
Yeah.
Fuck, man.
Yeah.
That's so triggering.
It is. And so it took me, I think, a long time to kind of come back around to, okay, this is actually something that I can engage with consciously and sacredly, and meeting the right people, having friends in our lives who were engaging with it as medicine, was very supportive, and cannabis has been one of the greatest allies in my journey of self-discovery and self-healing. So
yeah. When there was the switch in Washington State for the decriminalization and then the eventual legalities of it, was that something that excited you at the time, or was that something that kind of like was like, whoa, this is happening, huh? Like, this is interesting. Like, I don't know. What was your kind of like thought about that being up here in this area?
Yeah, I think it was exciting. I think I can't even remember when that was at this point or what year it was, but it probably was just before I started getting back involved with cannabis in that way. So I might have not even been totally tuned into it. I do remember thinking like, okay, now I can be like, hey mom, this is legal, you want to get stoned with me? Which has been very fun to just experience the lessened I don't know what the word is, but like demonization of it, both like societally and then in this state where my mom and I both reside. So yeah, that's what I can remember about that time.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting to see how many people. And not in a judgment way, it's just an observing kind of thing about how the narrative changes for the individual once the laws change, right? And I think that's a very big thing to pay attention to also with the things like psilocybin therapies, MDMA, ketamine therapies that are coming out now that are becoming more legal. And it's almost like people are waiting. They know how beneficial this could be, but they're just so tied up in the legality side. And like, again, like the dare and how we were raised and these shadowy people in alleyways with their pockets and their trench coats and shit, you know? And it's like, there's a woman that I've had on the show a couple times, Leonora Russell. And she's a local woman that started, she was very pivotal in the decriminalization of mushrooms and plant medicines like 3 or 4 years ago. And she went as far as, so she understood that idea that there's the people that are just holding on to the legalities, and then there's people like that love Alex Gray art, and they're like, yeah, I'll put whatever, right? And so she went as far as creating 2 separate nonprofit organizations geared towards the demographics of those folks, right? So one's called the Enthenia Society, right? Entheogens, we all know that word. We love it. Alex Gray artwork, cool trippy shit. Yeah, got me. The other company she created was called the ADAPT program. And ADAPT is an acronym, which I can't remember what it means off the top of my head, but it's basically geared towards white collar folks that legality, follow all the legal guidelines. It's all like the scientific papers that are written on all these medicines, not pseudoscience, everything's backed. But by doing that extra work, she appeased both sides enough to get, the votes through to get that in there, right?
That's brilliant.
And so it's just interesting how like just parts of society are just so tied to this legality thing, which, that's your journey, right? I got plenty of legal things that I don't want to cross the lines on too, right? But it's almost like people are just waiting bated breath for these laws to pass or get changed to be like, oh my God, I can smoke weed legally now. I've been waiting my entire life. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, or have the right excuse. There's a lot of people who are just, not that it's a bad thing, but are very mainstream, and they won't feel confident until their doctor is talking to them about it, until their friends, in whatever community they're a part of, are starting to utilize it for, air quotes, like reputable reasons. Like I think the CBD world and the topicals and using, edibles for sleep has been the thing I've noticed, especially like the older generation, the boomer generation, who were the ones who were foisting the dare and the this is your brain on drugs on us. They're kind of, now they're like, oh, it helps with sleep? Oh, well, in that case, or, it helps my arthritis. Oh, it allows them to feel safe and feel like, oh, okay. Whereas I imagine the three of us are a bit more on the fringe of mainstream and are willing to be adventurous and go searching in some of the little nooks and crannies of culture and question things and push back. But a lot of the world isn't like that. And for this medicine and a lot of the plant medicines out right now or other compounds, I think, those of us on the edge, I can speak for myself, like, we have to have the patience to be like, not everyone is adventurous like we are and willing to take risk and doesn't need, 10 peer-reviewed studies to try something out.
Right.
But to be like, but some people really do need that, and that's okay. And how do we, like your friend you mentioned, like, how do we meet them where they're at? How do we also work with those who are more like us and come at it from both ends, I think is brilliant.
Yeah. And, to that point also, whether we were alive during the times of Tim Leary and Ram Dass, or we have read the stories or heard the stories about it, I as excited as much as I love those gentlemen for what they've done for hallucinogens, I also understand how scary their approach was to society when they're like, everybody should take acid. Like, oh, fucking hell, man, let's back it up. Like, yes, but yes, and how about that? Yes, and let's figure this out.
Yeah.
And so that narrative might also be still with a lot of folks of like, man, like, we went deep and it took us some while to get back, and now we're in a narrative where we can actually responsibly reintroduce these medicines and a therapeutic benefit and try to figure out what's going on with these. So so Jared, what's your kind of relationship with cannabis over the years?
Fairly similar to Laurie's. I had the added constraint or interesting aspect of life of growing up in a family that had some substance abuse, more so alcohol, but cannabis was part of it, as well as some other kind of party drugs. And I was the oldest and was very impacted by how that energy showed up in our home life, in my relationship with the people that were struggling with that. And for me, I was like, I drank a little bit in high school. I smoked cannabis a few times. I didn't actually get high for, I don't know, 5 or 10 sessions. I think my protectors were like, nope, we're not letting go of control yet. And so, and when I did finally experience the high, it was pretty intense. And I struggled to feel comfortable or to feel like I could enjoy it. I was also often in really not great environments, and we were usually like in a friend's car listening to music that I didn't want to listen to in like a weird, awkward place, and we had to like drive somewhere else to pick somebody up, and so I'm just there's paranoia and anxiety and all kinds of things banging around, and that kind of continued even in college. I had a few experiences, but they weren't like, wow, this is great. It was more like, whoa, that was a lot. I think I'm good for a while. And that just continued to be the case. So I almost never worked with it. And similar with alcohol, I would go a year or more at times of not having any alcohol, and working through my own stuff I had going on about altering consciousness with substances.
Right, yeah.
I'd gotten really into meditation and some other forms of altering consciousness that were inner, like that I could induce and drop out of whenever I was ready, or wanted to, and that felt comfortable for me, and I went really excitedly down that path. And it wasn't until about 6 years ago that we met a friend who had a beautiful relationship with cannabis, and we both had been having conversations like, I really wish we could have a great relationship with cannabis, and then we could like work together, instead of it just being this like recreational party drug. And then the other part too is this friend we knew through the community of Wilderness Awareness School, where we had done programs. And I think nature connection is another thing that really added to being more open and available.
Yeah.
And this is something I bump into with people that I have conversations with about what I do, and that I work with medicines. And there's this prevalent stigma that I see all over the place of people believing they need to do it on their own. Oh, well, I need to do this work, this therapeutic work on my own. I need to be independent. I shouldn't have to rely on a substance for that. And I absolutely had that conversation going on for decades. But getting into nature connection, you realize how I'm not going to say ridiculous, because it's a valid conversation to be in, but I realized how uninformed I was at how not possible it is to be independent. That we're all relying on such a massive, nuanced ecology to do the simplest things in our lives. That it's just this illusion that we're doing it on our own and we're pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. And started to really understand just by sitting at my sit spot every day and seeing how the world works and how all these different species rely on each other, and where one leaves off, the other picks up, and how there's these symbiotic relationships, and how it all comes together to create these incredible environments, these ecologies we get to enjoy, and who support our living. And so that unlocked something in my mind too, of like, oh, I don't have to do it. I'm not doing it all on my own. not only do I not have to, I'm not.
Yeah.
And that opened a door of like, oh, okay, I feel more open to working with a compound, a plant medicine that can support me, that we can partner, we can co-work together on stuff. So anyway, long story short, we asked this friend, hey, would you hold like a ceremony for us and introduce us in a good way and help us choose the right strain and be in the right environment, listen to the right music, and set some intentions. And he was excited to do it. And so we did. We spent an afternoon, and it was phenomenal. I mean, the experience of sitting with the medicine was completely different than anything else I'd ever experienced. Yeah. Having some intentions, sitting with the right strain, with the right person in an environment that was really conducive for it. It was night and day different. And yeah, haven't really looked back. Started working with cannabis regularly pretty quickly after that. Felt like I had enough to go explore on my own. And that was 6 years ago. And yeah, now I share that cannabis has probably been one of my greatest allies in my healing journey, my visioning and creative journey, and as a huge contributor to where I am now, the work I'm doing now, what I'm able to provide for clients, and support people in creating their own relationship with cannabis, which often involves healing their relationship that's existing around cannabis, because there's a lot of stigma from how we grew up and how the culture experiences, illegal, quote unquote, drugs.
Yeah.
And so, and now it's the medicine that I am most allied with, and is the one that I've seen. I won't say the biggest transformations in clients, but it's been one of the biggest supports in the work that I do with clients. And it's a beautiful plant.
Yeah. And you guys both, mentioned some beautiful things I want to just kind of unpack real quick. The nature connection, I think that you guys spoke of is amazing. There's so much disconnection we have with nature in general. I think I think it's the Cambridge Dictionary has the definition of nature as anything that's created outside of humanity. So we in the definition of nature, we remove ourselves from nature, which is like, come on, man, where the fuck did we come from? Then, right? And that nature connection, I think, is so beneficial therapeutically in general, right? But if you find the medicines while you're in that nature, right? But I think the thing that really kind of layers on top of that for me, so growing up in Houston, I wasn't able to have a lot of outdoor experiences. It's so goddamn hot. It's flat. Hiking wasn't a thing. We floated a river every once in a while, but it was still 115 degrees, right? So it's like you're in and out, right? But so that nature connection, the availability was there. It just wasn't something that I was culturally brought into, which I think adds to that safe spaces idea, right? Because in safe spaces, like even with alcohol, there are bars you can go to that feel safe. You can belly up to a bar, grab a table, grab a booth, whatever. You go to the store, buy a 6-pack, whatever, right? There's options. There were options back then to where you had a safe space to consume your alcohol. Us potheads didn't, right? We were roaming bike trails. We were going in back alleys or sitting in weird spaces until somebody was old enough to have an apartment, and then that became the safe haven. But it was still kind of cloak and daggery kind of shit, and that leads to that narrative that we have in our head about like, oh, I'm doing bad things. I'm a nefarious child, right? I'm doing weird type kid shit, right? Which kind of ostracizes us, like keeps pushing us away. And the last thing I want to really touch on is the myth of the self-made person, right? Because I think all of this kind of adds into that. We have this, especially in the West, this idea that we can do it all ourselves. Yeah. Like, we got this, right? Nobody's given me anything. I built this from the ground up myself. Right. Bullshit. Complete bullshit. Yeah. And so not to get all scientific and shit, but like the self-made person, I don't know enough about this subject to talk, like speak poetically or wax about it, but like the little research I've done about mitochondria in our cells, which mitochondria inhabit every single one of our cells. Yeah, they have zero commonality in DNA with us. There's no DNA commonality between our mitochondria, which give us energy to be fucking human beings, and the cells that keep us alive, right? Yeah. So why? We're not just a thing. Like, we're multiple things, like just based off our biology. So this self-made human being thing is just, it's so toxic. And so it gets us into these awkward positions to where it's like, oh, I'll just think my way out of this. It's like, that's the problem of the brain, is that the brain thinks it can solve its own problems. Yeah. So fucking ask a question, get a homie, involve a medicine, right? Get yourself out of that pattern-making brain that you've already, ritualistically got into. Yeah. And introduce some maybe controlled chaos to give you another way that you can think about life, approach life, whatever it is, so that we're not just spinning on this damn wheel all the time. Yeah. So with the ritualisticness, how did that kind of? I know you spoke to it just now, Jared, but like, how did that like open your eyes, change like an idea, like, because in I remember when the first time somebody presented the idea of sitting with cannabis as a medicine ritualistically, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, but I never thought about that. Yeah. And like, I had been smoking weed for back smoking weed again for almost a decade and a half. And I never considered it. And I've sat with Hape, I sit with Sananga, I sit with, peyote, all these different medicines, but I just grab my pipe and smoke my weed, and I don't think twice about it. Yep. So like, with you guys, what impact did that ritual, the involvement of like a ritual have on the relationship and the maybe just even the story around it?
I mean, again, back to going to the wilderness school, we got introduced to ceremony in a new way. We both grew up in the church and had our own experiences of that, but neither of us came out of that experience hardcore Christians that were going to church all the time. There was things I loved about church, but and the ceremonial aspect was probably one of the biggest things. Having music, having intention, having prayer, like connecting to spirit, connecting to community. But the message didn't resonate super well with me. So I just kind of like let go of ceremony for, I don't even know how long. And it wasn't until coming to Wilderness Awareness School, and we both did the 9-month immersion program. And all of a sudden there was ceremony, but done in a much more land-based, connected way that wasn't religious. You didn't have to believe anything necessarily to participate. It was just like, you're a human. Humans have been doing this forever. As long as we were able to, congregate and have some kind of organization to what we were doing, we've been in ceremony. And so, yeah, for me, it was really recognizing how it felt in my body, how right it felt in my body, and how kind of destigmatized and it removed all the mystery around it. It wasn't this scary like thing where I had to do things right, or I had to know what I was doing, or I had to believe in something or anything. Like, it was just all stripped away. And it was like, no, it's just a space you enter into where you hold some intention or prayer. That's about it. And you have a beginning and a middle and an end. Done. And so I got really comfortable with ceremony in that program and in that culture. And then it was the time where I started hearing from friends or people, colleagues that had gone to Peru, who had gone into the Amazon to do medicine ceremonies with ayahuasca or different medicines. And so that started filtering in. And this friend that ended up introducing us to cannabis had been studying with a teacher in Peru and had been working with ayahuasca and a number of other medicines that he was doing dietas with. And so he was very just in that realm and world. And so it was, and he through that on his own had brought that learning to his relationship with cannabis. And it was bringing intentionality to it and having some ceremony around it. So it was just a perfect fit. And we just recognized that in him. That was all we had to do. It was like, oh, you get it. You're where we want to be with that. Please help.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's how it opened up and started for me. And then it really hasn't shifted since then. I mean, I enjoy cannabis recreationally, but even still, I will pray over the medicine before I take it in.
Right. Yeah.
It's very rare that I won't. And it's usually when it's in like a situation where it would maybe make other people uncomfortable.
Okay.
And even then, I'm kind of like doing it in my own little way. There's no like outward.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not bowing my head or anything. But yeah, it's just I notice a difference when I don't.
Yeah.
It's a very different experience.
There's a I think it was just like a book I was reading recently. I can't remember it now, but they were talking about just on the ritual side, saying thank you. Even in situations where maybe it might create an awkward moment for people, right? And this family had a practice of saying grace without saying grace. They say grace with their first bite. And so they chew it, and while they're chewing it, they're saying grace, and they're basically chewing it as much as they can, getting it down to a paste, just like thanking every little bit of nutrient with that. Yeah. And and it kind of reminds me of something like that. It's like, okay, I don't want to create an awkward moment right here for everybody, but as I'm, let's say, putting the flame to this plant, and I'm drawing this plant smoke in, I'm saying thank you, I'm maybe putting my intention as to what I'm looking for, release anxiety, manage my depression, whatever. And so that's kind of like goes to that idea where we're always in ceremony.
Yeah.
Life is a ceremony, life is a ritual. And I think there's this isn't the podcast to get into it, but that's something I've been dealing with a lot lately. It's just like setting up a time to be in ritual. It's like, even though I'm not constantly thinking of spirit or constantly thinking about, my quote unquote right action, it feels almost disingenuous to stop the boat, start the ceremony, get into a right, quote unquote, right state of mind, but then at the end of the ceremony, do we stop the right state of mind? So again, not the right podcast to get into it, but like for me personally, I'm really struggling with this whole like ceremony ritual kind of idea. But so what does a ritual or a ceremony look like for cannabis? Like, was that something that has kind of changed over the time you guys have used these ceremonies, or does it change within like the kind of situation that you're in?
Yeah, I think both.
Okay.
One of the things that I was remembering as Jared was sharing just now is when we started, I don't know if this is the right timeline, but it seems like it kind of arose together of, we have a Friday night ritual. Mirabai Starr wrote a book that I can't remember the name of about the mystic feminine wisdom.
Okay.
And she has a chapter in there about keeping the Sabbath holy and the ways that she does that and the way that she has adapted that. And we started our own kind of Friday night ritual, and cannabis very quickly became involved in that.
Okay.
And so most Friday nights were, home having a meal, and it became a way to include cannabis in our relationship. It was like reaching for the beloved. That was Mirabai Starr's language for it. And we would do that together. It was like a sacred date night. And cannabis, sometimes it was like we were really in it as a couple, and cannabis would support us in navigating some of those things. Or it would be a celebration of the week and, and gratitude and reflection and things like that. So there's all these different ways that I think cannabis has, cannabis and ritual and ceremony have alchemized in our lives personally, back to nature connection, right? And the school that we participated in, like we talk a lot about core routines there, right? So like sit spot that Jared mentioned, like I could never do sit spot sitting in a spot, being in my senses, paying attention to something other than my thoughts for very long. Cannabis definitely helped me understand the power of that practice. And it's just, beautiful and sensory and all that. But so there's all these different ways that has infused itself in our lives. But then as we continued to, our paths of service and our work has continued to unfold, and we've started to sit with medicine more with clients and more in our offerings, it's become a whole different thing. We just hosted for the first time at our house. Jared hosted a beautiful ceremony last week and guided people on a journey. I'll let you say more about it. I don't know. I was just cutting up fruit and making sure people had water and stuff. But from what I heard from those folks who were there, it was like, yeah, just such a beautiful opportunity to engage intentionally and connect with this medicine, which for a lot of them, just like we talked about however many minutes ago, it's like people just haven't done that for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of those people do have experience with other medicines. It's like, oh, we can do this with cannabis.
Well, what just came to me just now is, I grew up in, like I said, in Houston. 80s, 90s was my impact time of like teenage and young adolescence, and on top of the stigmas around cannabis usage, all of our weed was being smuggled over the border in like detergent, right? And so you get an ounce of weed from Mexico, in the size of like a cigarette pack, that smelled like tied with bleach, that was all compacted together. Yeah. It was all this hard brick, right? And so like the whole process started off as like this, like it's not even the real product, right? Like here, you at least go to a smoke shop now and you get these full beautiful nugs. You can maybe look at it, but back then it was like this. I mean, it just almost dove it even deeper into this nefarious kind of thing. It's like you can't even get the real looking product. Right. You got to get this compact hidden product that smells like crap. Right. That is going to like have the tinge of bleach in it when you smoke it, but eventually you'll smoke enough to get high, right? And it's like, what the fuck is that all about, right?
Yeah.
But there's with the cannabis trainings that you guys went through, and I want to get to ceremony, like what a ceremony looks like here in a minute. But I'm really interested to hear your guys' feedback on like the training, like what maybe some of the practices to get you ready for holding space, whether it was the different ways of ingesting the medicines to holding space in the ceremonies. And the reason I'm interested is, I know a lot of people that have done like psychedelic assisted therapy programs, whether ketamine, MDMA, or psilocybin. But one of the most intense practices for a medicine that I've heard recently was I have a friend that's been on a tobacco medicine kick, and is sitting in Peru right now with some ayahuascarians doing the dietas and stuff like that. And part of this person's process is drinking tobacco water every single day, basically drinking tobacco juice, almost to the point of throwing up, as part of getting that medicine in your body, right? And so they're smoking it, drinking it, hape, sniffing it, things like just like tobacco, to really get the body understanding of what this medicine does to like extreme points to low points, and really how to maneuver around it, which I feel and I understand like totally the reasoning behind that. But like drinking tobacco water seems a bit fucking intense. But hey, man, I don't know enough one way or the other. But like, so is there in the ritual preparations to hold the space from the learnings you guys had? What are some of those kind of practices you guys had to go through, whether intense or just maybe like, wow, this is what we're doing here. Okay, cool. This is our human life today. All right. We're fucking, making weed water or something,
Haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
Bong water is probably the closest we've gotten. Accidental, like, oop, I got something in my mouth.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, our training spanned multiple medicines, and cannabis was a smaller part of that specific training. A lot of our understanding and working with cannabis comes a lot more from our personal research, reading books, and just from our own experimentation. I would say cannabis as a medicine is very much in modern Western culture in its infancy. There's only a few people doing it on a larger scale right now that have really dialed in some protocols and how to work with it, how to teach people how to work with it. And so our training in cannabis specifically was much more on the minimal side.
Okay.
I learned some things, and it shaped some ways I work with it with clients. But as far as learning the medicine, I had already gotten a lot of my experience from personal growth and experimentation. But in our training, it was really just smoked and at low dose, specifically to support doing IFS style parts work.
What's that mean?
Internal family systems is a therapy modality, and that was part of our training as medicine guides, was to learn parts work. And cannabis is a really strong, like I can talk for days about like what cannabis, how it works, how it supports us. Each of the, you've mentioned a number of psychedelics and different compounds that they have their kind of realm of genius that they're really supportive of, and how you work with it. And cannabis has its own realm, and cannabis is quite the shapeshifter. Cannabis can be used in a lot of different ways. And depending on what kind of strains you use, how you blend strains, there's a phenomenal book I got into as I started learning how to work with cannabis with clients called Psychedelic Cannabis. And in that he describes how he can mimic a psilocybin journey. He can mimic an MDMA journey. He can create something completely different that you've never experienced before. And I haven't gotten as deep as that to be able to necessarily mimic things, although when I work with clients, I will blend different strains together with intention, with like, oh, this is what this client is bringing to this upcoming session. Do I want to lean more in like a really psychedelic direction and have them really, get blasted out to the stars as if they were taking LSD or psilocybin? Or are we working with them more on like cementing their belonging and feeling safe, and being able to work with some of their protector parts in parts work, in which case I want the opposite. I want something that's really grounding, feels really safe and comfortable, more like an MDMA journey. And so there's ways in which I will blend it. But for my own personal research, to get back to your question, and how I've like trained myself to be someone who can partner well with cannabis and knows how to work with her. I hesitate to say her. My relationship with cannabis, she's very feminine, and other people have different relationships. But yeah, I've experimented with as many of the different ways of imbibing cannabis as I can, and have definitely found Some are better than others in different applications. I've been really trying to dial in the edible side, and I make my own oils and things like that, and tinctures. But there's so much to play with around, like, how long does it take to come on? How long is a session with someone? How long is it going to continue to be in their system? And that's the hard part with edibles, because a lot of the work I do with people is a shorter session, and it's a lower dose, and we're doing more parts works type work. Whereas I'm starting to move into doing bigger, more day-long type ceremonies with people where I am bringing in edible, because we have the time for them to be sitting with the medicine that long. And the other aspect with cannabis is it, similar to some medicines, is the more you take it, the less impact it has. Right. So there's also something to be intentional with cannabis, of dialing in how much you're taking and when you're taking it and for what purposes, because over time it will have less of an impact. You have to take more and more and more of it. And for all of you who've maybe only had cannabis a few times, that one first time or first handful of times is, you often can't recapture that experience. And there's a lot of medicine in that experience, again, if you're in the right situation. Right. So, all that to say, there's definitely different ways to take it in and to work with it and to prepare yourself. There's a lot more I could share about the bigger training and work to be someone who's then ready to serve medicine, which is a bigger conversation than just cannabis. But that has also been a process I've been in and continue to be in, of like, you have to have such a strong relationship with the medicine. You have to be doing your own healing work and clearing your own stuff out, so that you actually have the space to sit with other people, and to be able to have them have their own experience and be going where they need to go without triggering my own stuff. And so that has also been a big part of the process, and having cannabis and some of the other medicines support me. And, that's often one of my big intentions whenever I'm sitting with medicine in a ceremony, is like, please help me and prepare me to sit with others, and to step into this role of being someone who sits with other people with medicine. And I want to like exclamation point that statement, because I feel like we're at a kind of a dicey spot now, and in a lot of our excitement in the West, to not take the time to fully understand what you're doing before you get into it. And that's for the person to figure out, right? That's, whether it's a training you feel comfortable having to do, which I don't think everything has to be certified. I think there is, like you said, personal experience that can be taken into account for that. Like with my psychedelic journeys, I've been sitting with mushrooms and psychedelics since I was 17 years old. Definitely big breaks in there when I had kids, but got back into it as a medicine, not a drug. So, but I do feel like there is, and I'm not trying to tie into a terminology, but I'll just say it because it's on top of my head, but like the Instagram shamans, right? Where it's like, I'm sure your personal intention is good, but the way that it's being put out there is kind of dangerous, So I think it is that personal check-in with yourself of like, do I actually feel safe holding space in this area, or am I just doing am I just going along with the trends, right? Oh, I smoke weed. We'll do a ceremony. Cool. Right. Yeah, got you, right? I've taken hallucinogenics for 20 some odd years. I'll hold space for you while you're tripping your face off. No, let's dial that back a little bit. And I think, the other question I wanted to ask both of you guys is the strength of cannabis. Not that I'm complaining, has grown immensely over the past few decades. And edibles is the big thing for me, right? I remember in the 90s, the first edible I took. I was in my apartment. This guy comes over with a chocolate chip cookie the size of what I would say a normal chocolate chip cookie, maybe 3-inch diameter. And I'm like, cool, I love chocolate chip cookies. That's got weed in it. Let's do it, right? And so it's like, he gives me this cookie, goes in the kitchen, comes back. I ate the cookie. I'm fucking love cookies, right? And then he comes in, he's like, no, you're only supposed to eat this much. And I'm like, if I was supposed to eat an Alice in Wonderland size amount of this, you should have given me that off the bat. I'm a former fat child. I'm going to eat a fucking cookie in my face, right? And then I was high for like 5 days in a very uncomfortable way, like head detaching kind of shit. And when I stopped smoking marijuana in, let's say, 2004 when I had my first kid, and didn't start back until, let's say,
I was probably in my 30s, so 2000, maybe 10 or 15, 10 or 12, and when I got back into it, I was like, oh my God, this is not the weed I grew up on, especially in Texas. This weed like put me on my ass, and it took me a while to understand the levels of what I'm dealing with now and all that stuff. But as as practitioners that hold this space, how hard is it to kind of judge some of those strains and like the potency and the efficacy of like especially edibles, which can be in my experience, complete curveballs. Is that something that you guys have? It took a while to get that, or you have like reputable ways that you now work with that medicine to know roughly what that like.
I mean, there's always a little bit of guesswork involved, and obviously everybody's different. What's their background? What's their experience? What's their sensitivity? All of that. But one of the fun things, I think this is fun, is we're always testing on ourselves of like, okay, like what is this combination? Like Jared has gotten into blending, and so sometimes if he has a client, I'll be his guinea pig, and it's like what did you notice? It doesn't mean that's going to translate to the client, right? But just like you're right, like a lot of the things that you just go and get at a dispensary is like, so much more potent than my Burt pipe in high school. And then the other fun thing is finding people who are in this conversation and are in the medicinal context to grow. So, I mean, and dispensaries, I guess you could say in some ways are doing that, but Jared has gotten connected with a good friend of ours, stepson, who, long story short, different state and different rules and different legalization and blah, blah, blah. But, has really struggled to keep his business going and is looking for people who are using cannabis in a sacred way. And then he's growing for that, and so he sends, Jared's got a whole spreadsheet. He's big into spreadsheet. But it's a fun way to try to find the people who are like tending to the medicine as medicine, right? I think that makes a big difference. Just making sure that, what we consume and what we offer is held in that way, and I think it makes a big difference.
It does. I when I first started microdosing and getting back into hallucinogenics on my side for therapeutic purposes. The person that I found that I received from like grows everything himself. He's got crystals all over, does prayers and chants and mantras and stuff. And I'm like, right up my alley, man. And not only knowing the person, knowing the process, it adds that layer of safety for me. And then when I'm able to sit with these medicines with my clients, it that translates to them as well. Because they're like, if you feel safe and I trust you, then I 100% feel safe, right? Totally. And I think knowing and just knowing the that pattern, the supply chain, if you will, where that comes from. Because like when I worked at Red Hook and Diamond. I've worked at breweries, over the past few years. Part of my corporate job I got away from, and even though like working for those spaces, the brand itself had its own name, but when we would sell that to the guests, like say in the pub, and we knew where the hops came from, we knew where the barley came from, we had the story about it, added that layer of safety to the guest. If it was something new, they're like, oh, I'll try that. Like, that, the name of the guy that grew the fucking hops, that's cool, man, let's do that, right? So it does, the story and that layer of safety, I think, allows us to step into those spaces a little bit more confidently.
And just a layer of connection, right? It's like the same, like eating at a farm-to-table restaurant with someone who's like, these, carrots are from the farm just down the road, right? It's like the same kind of sense of like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'm more connected to this than I would be otherwise, Yeah,
it's not like a supermarket where I'm just going to buy craft.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, I know this person, I know the human.
Yeah.
So what does a like, I know probably ceremonies probably vary depending on what people are trying to approach, but what does a ceremony kind of idea look like for cannabis?
Yeah, it can be as simple as sometimes I've sat with people who are open to rehabilitating their relationship or start transforming their relationship with cannabis because they've had those negative connotations, they've had some experiences that didn't go well. And so I'll have sessions where I'll pick a specific strain that I know will really be very gentle and soft and low dose. And in that situation, we keep it pretty minimal. It's as simple as, I'll pack the bowl, I'll offer to them and just give them a little bit of guidance of like, here's an opportunity to just speak to the flower and share why you're sitting with this beautiful plant, and what your intentions are. Another thing I started doing that has helped immensely as well is I almost have two parts to my prayer. One is like, here's my intention, here's why I'm coming to sit with you. And the second is, if possible, here's the kind of high I would like. And I especially started doing this with psilocybin, but I've brought it over to my relationship with cannabis, and it helps quite a bit. I'm very surprised at how much that actually shows up. So I also do that when I'm sitting recreationally, because often it's like, I'm not here to have a big like healing journey. I'm sitting with some close friends after dinner. We're going to listen to some music. And so I'll ask like, here's what, I'd really like to be able to hear the music better. I'd really like to feel the music in my body more and have the energy support me, things like that. So I usually do kind of those two parts. And we'll, again, with ceremony, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So we'll define, okay, we're going to start the ceremony by lighting this candle. And when we blow it out, that'll be the end. So it's always important to have container to it, because that way we can really distinguish like when we're in the space, when we're not in that space. And so that kind of ceremony where I'm just introducing someone to it in a new way. Usually I'll have a few different things I'll do with them. I'll play some music that I've selected, something I probably already know they'll like, but that has some really nice nuance and layers to it that the cannabis will kind of draw out for them and give them kind of that, wow, ooh, that's cool. I never noticed that before. I usually take them outside, take them on a walk. We're lucky to live on some really beautiful forested land. And so we're able to go out and listen to the birds and watch the trees blow in the wind a little bit and just kind of drop into that nature vibe that's happening all around us that we very rarely tune into. And again, cannabis can really heighten that experience and help us tune into things that we hadn't noticed before. Dance is another one, getting people in their bodies. The biggest complaint I get from people who have stuff in their relationship with cannabis is anxiety and paranoia.
Right, yeah.
And I often find that part of that is choosing the right strain, but also part of it is just some strains have more energy to them. And if you're not moving, if you're not giving that energy a place to go, it's going to go to your head and it's going to turn into darker thoughts. It's going to turn into that energy getting stuck.
Yeah.
So that's another thing I'll do, especially if maybe I've had a first session where we've sat really, really chill, mellow strain, then we'll move to a more of an energetic strain. And that's when I'll introduce some more movement, some dance, some yoga, things like that to give the energy a place to go. And I find that helps a lot. And then on the other end of the spectrum is, kind of in the middle of the spectrum, I would say, is doing the more parts work. That's usually like a 3-hour session where we'll do some prep. Then we'll have them imbibe. And then there's probably an hour and a half at the most, 45 minutes to 90 minutes of them actually being in the experience. And it's kind of like a guided meditation I'm journeying them through. They're meeting with different parts. I also blend in some shamanic journeying and have, that they can connect with ancestors or guides or things like that. And basically kind of tapping into their inner resources, meeting these different parts that are needing some attention and some love. And again, in that situation, it's a pretty low dose, just enough to kind of get them out of their head and quiet a lot of the voices that are happening, and allow them to tune in to specific voices, and be able to work with them and have conversation. I also find cannabis, certain strains are really strong at firing up the imagination and bringing a lot of clarity to the mind's eye so that they can really see the parts and it feels much more real to them. And it's easier to stay on task. Oftentimes when I'm doing that, when someone hasn't had some cannabis, it's easy for their mind to kind of wander or to be too in their head of like, this isn't real, I'm not doing it right, those kinds of things. And then, now I'm working with people doing deep dives. We'll have a much larger dose. We're there for the day. And in those, there's, we're doing prep calls ahead of time, anywhere from 2 to 3. I'm usually doing a smaller parts work session with them before, so that we've had some time together with them sitting with the medicine, so they can kind of get used to that, build some trust that I can hold them in that. They're doing some prep work with the parts work to be ready to go into a bigger dose, that you kind of get like, okay, what's involved, what's going on right now for me, what's in my constellation of parts that need some love, resources that I can lean on, things like that. And then they can bring that into the bigger dose. And so with that bigger dose, we'll have a few, 4-ish hours where they're in a blindfold listening to music on their journey, just working with the intention or prayer that we've prepared for them to come into. And then afterwards they do it fasted. So then we're bringing them some food. We're doing a little bit of debrief. We're doing some breath work, maybe some movement, kind of helping them land back in their body, feeding them a little bit more. And then getting them home to kind of begin their integration process. And then we'll do integration calls afterwards to keep that process going, offer reflections, things like that, to keep the experience and the richness that came through actually having it move into their life and not just be this cool thing they did that one day.
I think, everything you just explained is amazing. But I think that what you just ended on, I think, is the biggest spot that we have as a community, the ability to capitalize on a little bit more is the integration. Yeah. How do we integrate? And not just, the beautiful ceremony you just explained, but like a cool conversation we just had. Like this conversation after you guys leave, obviously I'll listen to it again because I got to edit stuff. But, there's a reason we're talking, and there's something that, I can glean from you guys. Maybe you guys can glean from whatever, Yeah. But, from the yoga class that I took this morning to the sound bath I'm going to do tomorrow, like all these different things that are in my personal life, there are these little like awesome Easter eggs out there for me to get something from if I take the time to see it, to journal, to conversate, to just sit and reflect for a little bit. And I think there's a lot of life in general that we can start to, get a little bit more out of if we give ourselves that ability to, whether it's slow down, to appreciate the people in front of us, the experience we just had, instead of this just go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. It's like, just changing a light bulb to change a light bulb rather than changing the light bulb and thinking about what kind of books my kid's going to read now that she can see. Yeah. It's like, cool. Okay. Well, hey, I'll screw this light bulb in a little slower, think about how cool my kid is and what she likes to read. And then I'll go on to my next task. Right. Yeah. Instead of just pencil whipping shit off our fucking list all day, So I got to mention this because it just came to my mind, but, Seth Rogen, amazing, love comedian. I love the guy. But he's kind of transitioned into cannabis. He does this thing called houseplants now where he's making ashtrays and pottery and stuff like that. But I haven't listened to the albums yet. I just found it the other day. But he's got compilation albums that he's put together called, I can't remember, God damn it. I can't remember the name of the series. But they're made to be listened to depending on which strain you're listening to or you're smoking. So indica, sativa, or hybrid. And the idea, I think, is to be like a monthly kind of like record club. And he sends you vinyl every month depending on which one you're going towards.
Oh, that's very cool.
So when you mentioned like the music that kind of accompanies, I'm like, oh, that's kind of fun.
Cool. I should check that out.
We're going to check that out for sure, yeah.
And Seth Rogen. I mean, come on. He's fucking great.
He's a great ambassador.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So with the different types of rituals, I just want to put this out there too. Laurie, if you're ever busy and Jared, you need a guinea pig, I'm happy.
Great.
I'll sacrifice my time. So does this seems like something that is like an ever growing, right? There's not like just a way to do this, right? And so it's depending on the people that you guys work with. It sounds like you have a lot of intake calls to make sure that we're set up ready to do this. And I really just want to highlight to the listeners like how important that is. We talked about integration afterwards, but like the safety that you feel from the people that are holding the space for you, and the space you're in, and the medicines you're with, and the dialogue being, all that stuff. The safer you feel, the deeper you can go. Yeah. And that is such. I think that might miss a lot of people until you actually experience that safety.
Yeah.
And you really realize how much you've been holding on to in white knuckling life, because you don't even realize you've been carrying a 2-ton boulder.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you put it down, you're like, oh my God, holy shit, this whole time, like I feel so light now.
Yeah.
You know, so finding the right practitioners, feeling safe, you know, stepping into what seemingly it's like, you know, a lot of us maybe have just like passively grabbed a pipe and not even thought about it and smoked, right? But to have the container and the layers created of safety can let that medicine do something that, like you said, like you've never even realized it could do for you. Yeah. But when we think about that, think about like that layered onto life in general. You know, I have a beautiful friend named Marianne that's been doing really deep somatic training right now. And one of the practices that she's coached me into is the practice of just simply looking around a room. Right. And so like say going into your local grocery store, QFC, Fred Meyer, whatever. And a lot of times we'll go in, head down, just on a mission. I'm going to get my shit, get out. And hopefully nobody sees me. Nobody interacts with me. I don't have to talk to anybody. I'm just in and out, self-checkout. I'm good. But what happens if you like go in, pull yourself off to the side, back up to a wall, and just take 30 seconds, a minute just to look around, look in the rafters, look behind the carts, you know, look over behind the Starbucks over there, and just, you know, like see, oh, there's a person working, hey, cool, all right, produce over there. Cool, all right. I feel safe.
Yeah.
There's not any, there's no mobster out, you know, I got to sit in a corner booth and make sure nobody gets behind me and shit, you know, and it just subconsciously, we might not realize we're acting in those ways, but subconsciously, very much so. Like now that I realize that stuff and that she's kind of put that little nugget into my head, I realize how many times I will go into a place by myself, like a coffee shop, sit in the back with my back into a corner. Nobody can get behind me. What the fuck am I afraid of? I've got no warrants. I've got nobody against me. Nobody out for me. I've got no bounty on my head. Why do I act like I do? Because right? I don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And I don't realize that until you realize it.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's like, yeah, add those layers of safety in because we're white knuckling life out here.
Totally.
Yep.
Another place to take some lessons from nature, like even your house cat, like watching your house cat go outside. Watch the way they enter the yard or wherever they go. Like they always stick to the edge. They pause and look around. They listen. They sniff the air. Then they'll go to another spot where they're again, you know, near a fence or a tree or something where they've got some defensible space, and they slowly move out into the space and check out what's going on. Are there any big birds hanging around outside? Is there, you know, what are the birds saying right now? Is there something going on out here that I need to be tuned into? And yeah, I think in a modern life as humans, and especially in cities and urban areas, we just there's like this subconscious assumption. Well, there's police and there's rules and laws. Of course I'm safe, but our subconscious knows better,
right?
And is like, yeah, no, I'm not buying that. And so it comes through subconsciously and anxiety, and you know, we're shifting our vision around all the time, like really quickly, looking for threat without even necessarily realizing that's what's happening. We're just feeling a little unease, and like you said, when we then actually get the experience of like, oh, I actually feel really safe, especially when we're in a situation where we're altering our consciousness, which can be really disorienting. You know, the first time I sat with a guide with medicine, it was profound how distinct it felt to be like, whoa, I'm in a really destabilized situation here, but I trust my guide implicitly. Like, I know I'm in good hands. I know I can let go of all my thoughts and fears of what's going to happen at this or that. I'm just like, this person has it.
Right.
I don't have to worry about any of that.
Right.
And it clears the space so much. And every time I do a guided journey, I have that same exact experience and now I think of it as it's decadent. It's like one of the greatest gifts I can give to myself is for a whole day, I'm not even responsible for my own safety.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not responsible for anything. No one can ask me for anything. And this other person is going to make sure I get what I need. And it's beautiful. And I offer that to clients now, of just like, lean into that.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to do anything. You need a sip of water? I'm here. You need this? I'm here.
Right.
You need a different music track? No problem. You're feeling scared? Call me over. You know, it's like, we'll work it through, but you don't have to sweat that. And that opens us up so much to be able to go deeper, like you said, to take on the harder things, and helps our protector parts do the same thing, to let go of that white knuckle grip and be like, okay, we're going to go along for the ride. We trust this person we're sitting with. Let's see where we go.
I had I just have to share this story one time because it's the most recent new person holding space for me. And it was amazing. So I did a darkness retreat in March and sat for 5 days in darkness. And so there's this woman named Viv that took care of me, fed me, you know, all that fun stuff. And I didn't see her at all during that time, but, you know, I had met her. I knew she was feeding me twice a day. I could hear her rustling when she would drop the food off, so I'd feel that little bit of comfort, you know. And she was amazing. She cooked beautifully. She took good care of me. Every once in a while she'd check in. Hey, Adam, you doing okay? You know, just real sweet. But there was a day that, let's say, I thought, okay, so I checked in on a Saturday night, and I was supposed to get out Friday morning, right? That was my 5-day span. And so I had been in my own shit, going through my stuff, working through my things, so I assumed it was Wednesday night. I assumed, like, with all confidence that it was Wednesday night. So I'm like, okay, I got like a day and a half. I was counting meals, sleeps, all this shit, right? It's a beautiful experience. I'll talk to you guys about it later. So I got this confidence of like, it's Wednesday night. I know it's Wednesday night. So when I hear her rustling to drop the food off, I'm going to ask her. I'm going to say, hey, Viv, what day is it? And so I heard her a couple, whatever time later. And I heard her rustling around. I'm like, hey, all stupid, cocky and shit. I'm like, hey, what day is it today? And she goes, you really want to know? And I'm like, yeah, I want to know. And she goes, it's Tuesday morning. And I'm like, what? Tuesday morning? I thought it was Wednesday night, right? Yeah. So I'm like, my whole world fell apart, right? And the reason I mentioned this is because of the space this woman was holding. So my whole world fell apart. And I'm like, thanks for letting me know, like I'll go cower in the corner. Yeah. And so as, I hear her leave and I sit back down and I'm just like, I start going through this just emotional roller coaster of like, how did I lose a day and a half? Yeah. How did I lose all this time? There's no way. Oh my God, maybe she's lying to me. Maybe that's part of their process is when somebody asks, they continue to disorient them. So she's got to be lying to me. And at that moment, I separated myself. I was the man going through the panic attack that I put myself in. And then I was observing myself and like, hey, let's see how far you go with this. Right. And as soon as I got to that point of where I accused Viv in my head that she's doing this intentionally, she's manipulating me. This observer was like, oh, let's see where you go with this. Because this person has been caring for you for 3 days now, providing meals, making sure you're alive, all that shit. And now she's lying to you? Let's see where this goes. But it was that amount of safety that she had layered in the beginning, the intake, the setting up, that allowed me to create a relationship with her to eventually see how ridiculous I was taking myself into this, like, just spiraling out of control in this delusional fucking story to finally be like, you know that woman has your best interest in mind. She's not lying to you. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Fine, I guess. But but I attribute it to that space that she created and that safety to allow me to, spin my own wheels and get to my own space. I've never told her about that. Hopefully she'll maybe listen to one of these podcasts one day and be like, oh, that son of a bitch. But, it is so important to create that layer of safety and to make sure that not only you feel good in the space that you're holding, but the person that you're holding that space for feels good. Because that's where that depth really goes into. Yeah. Totally. So are there other types of medicines that you guys utilize to support yourself outside of cannabis? Whether it's plant medicines or, different types of energetic medicines that maybe not as regular, or just maybe some things that you're kind of introducing or starting to learn about?
Yeah, I mean, like Jared said earlier, I think it's really important if we're sitting with people with certain medicines that we be intimately familiar with them ourselves. Right. So continuing to sit with MDMA and psilocybin, which are the other primary medicines that we both offer to people. And just taking the time to do our own work and clear out and be with what emerges in that unique relationship. Because when you enter in, like we just had that whole conversation, when you enter in another person that you're holding, obviously we're not sitting with the medicines when we're sitting with other people, but that feels really important.
Does with psilocybin, do you have a preference on microdosing or macrodosing, or is it kind of just again whatever is kind of needed at that moment in time?
I think it's whatever is needed by the client, but most of what we offer and have been trained in with people is what we would call a deep dive.
Deep dive, cool.
So a macro
hero's journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there was a so right before my darkness thing, as one of the first times I sat with ayahuasca, and it was through a church called the Santo Daime. Didn't expect anything like that in my journey in life. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, if I would have, one, sat with ayahuasca, I've been telling you probably no, but two, in a church setting, like, you are talking to the wrong Adam here. But it was amazing, and I loved the group that I was a part of, and was felt very safe. But the reason I mention this is because for the most part, when I sit with people in journeys or hold space for people in journeys, I'm as straight arrow as I can be. I'm of sound mind and body. If anything, I've like some tinctures like holy basil, something like that, but nothing like no cannabis, no microdosing, stuff like that. And but part of this sitting with the church in ayahuasca, everybody sat with the medicine, and the padrinos, the padrinas, the people playing the music.
Yeah.
Holy goddamn hell, man. I was so like trying not to be the practitioner Adam and be just immensely oppressed at the space being held and the cognition that these folks held while still being on these medicines, but keeping what they call the container safe. Holy Jesus Christ, man. It was amazing to see this happen. And afterwards, I went to the guitar player who played for 7 hours on 3 servings of ayahuasca. Wow. And I was like, all this aside, you're an amazing human being to do what you've done, to play and to keep like coherence for 7 hours straight off of whatever medicines good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Man.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Super impressive, man. I don't even know if like, Keith Richards could have done that, And that's like the state of mind I think he lives in,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting. Has Hape come into y'all's realm at all of medicines? Okay.
Heard of it, had some friends that work with it, but haven't been called to that one yet.
That's been a new one for me.
Yeah.
That's probably the past few years for me, and it's interesting because I feel like it complements my my relationship with cannabis kind of nicely because the way I look at cannabis, you mentioned this earlier, but the way I look at cannabis is it's for me it's very feminine. It brings off my feminine side, a little softer side, whereas the tobacco and the hape can bring out that more male masculine side for me, and I think in the past I probably lived in that masculine side, being part of corporations and like the iron fist bullshit, having to, whether I wanted to or not, show up in that masculine realm a little bit more. So I think once I got the opportunity to sit with cannabis again, after my kids got older and after I got out of my corporate life, it was almost like that encouragement to be softer on myself, to take it a little easier on myself, to not be so driven. Now, whether I was creating the right rituals around that for the responsible usage is a whole nother story, but I do feel like it layered in, or it chipped away some of that hard exterior that masculine side kind of really forced me towards that I don't want to be in.
Yeah.
So with there was the idea of a soul partnership that we talked about. Can you guys kind of expand on that a little bit? Is that a soul partnership within y'all selves, the people you work with, the medicines you work with?
Yeah. Yeah, I used to think, we've all heard the term soulmate. And I used to vomit in my mouth.
I was about to say, you cringed like a motherfucker.
At that notion. And I think I'll tell a little story about it. We were, Jared and I spend a lot of time on rivers together. It's one of the ways in which we chill out and connect with each other and with the beautiful place we live. And I don't know when, maybe a year or so ago, we were sitting on the river, and I think we were talking about this, and I was talking about my aversion, like, next about the word soulmate.
Yeah.
But then as we were reflecting on it and talking, I think it was maybe around our anniversary that this conversation was happening. And as we started sharing about it and just the ways that we were drawn together and the way we've been through hard times together and the way we've come back to each other and the lessons and the deepening and the way that I have had reflection of my soul's purpose through this relationship and the challenge. And as I was talking, I was like, shit, I think I'm describing you as my soulmate. There's this moment of like, and really coming to understand that term on just a whole nother level beyond the hallmarkness of it.
Yeah.
And so, I do think that is something that we bring to our work, which we do work with couples. And we're coming up on 17 years married this September.
Congratulations.
Yes,
That's
thank
amazing.
you. And it's been a whole twisty roller coaster, as all relationships are, but it's something that we just keep trusting. Like there's something that is calling us together, and then this is a whole bigger story which I won't go into, but we also are clear we're not having children. Okay. And in the last year have really started to think, well, then what is it that's wanting to be birthed through us, through our relationship?
Yeah.
And been seeing some really beautiful things in the attempt at answering that. And so that's some of the language I'd put to soul partnership.
That, I've never even thought about that. Like, what is this relationship birthing if not a child? Yeah. And not that and I guess in a way, like, I never thought about it as needing to. But, there's a reason that is a beautiful thing to look at and to think about.
Yeah.
So what did, what kind of like came from that? That, my 15-year-old kid asked me this one time, and it's one of the most profound things I've ever heard. But she said, Dad, what are the questions you're not asking yourself, and what are the answers you're not seeking? Like, you're 15.
Yeah.
What the hell is that, man? And that's exactly one of those things, It's like, what are those things that you're not asking yourself? What are those ideas you're not seeking? And it's like, why are these human beings brought together for whatever reason? Mm-hmm. And if we've decided as a group, as a couple, as a whatever it is, that we're not going to go, let's say, traditional, and let's say we're together to procreate. No, we're not together to do that. In the human sense, what are we procreating? What are we birthing in an energetic sense, in a like a tangible sense? Right? Yeah. Man, I love that. So what'd you guys come with?
Well, our work with couples has been a big part of it. But a lot of it is, we've engaged quite a bit with a modality called soulcraft, coined by Bill Plotkin. And we've done some work training and studying in that realm. And so we've each been on our individual journeys of like, why did my soul choose this body, this life, this time, this place to come into the world? What formative experiences have shaped me for my work in the world? And we've been on that journey on our own separately. And as we continued down that, we started, because we were already curious about like, we're not going to have children. So what are we doing here? The big question, why? Like, why are we together other than just we like to hang out and have sex and all the relationship stuff? Yeah. It's like we were clear there was something else going on that we didn't quite have our hands around. And we probably never will, but it was.
We like to hang out and have sex. I'm just now hearing
that
as
pretty foundational.
A little bit of a tagline or something. It's kind of absurd.
You put that in your intro.
That should be the name of the podcast. Like to hang out and have sex.
So absurd.
But yeah, so it all kind of converged. All of these kind of questions and conversations were coming together, and especially because we part of the long and winding story of ours is that we broke up at one point and were apart for a little over a year and dating other people and falling in love with other people and then came back together, and we're in this phase up until about a year ago of like, why did we come back together? Mm-hmm. Like, we were really present to our differences and why we broke up. Right. And something brought us back together, and we were having these conversations around like, why are we, like, maybe we're just not a good fit. Like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And we would get to this end of that argument, and we did this multiple times, where it felt like, okay, we're going to break, like, that's all that's left to do is break up. And it just kept not happening. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like we were trying to save it or make it work. It was just this deep knowing that we didn't have any words for. That was like, nope, we're supposed to keep doing this. And the why will show up at some point, maybe. Right.
And I think there's also another layer to what you're saying, which is back to medicine work, which is the first time I sought out medicine work was when we were back together and exploring ethical non-monogamy and openness, and I was so activated and triggered and like just could not see clearly, and just wanted complete relief from the challenge that we were experiencing, which is what led me to seek out my first guide and to sit with medicine, and it's led me to all kinds of things, including just a lot of childhood trauma and wounding. And so it's like the more in the past couple of years that we've been with each other and been like, oh, like I am poking at your core wound and you are poking at mine, and we could call it quits. Like, we don't have to keep doing this.
Right. Yeah.
But what is the possibility here? What is the opportunity here? And what is it in service of? Because I was not interested in continuing to experience what I was experiencing without that bigger context,
Right.
without that bigger conversation, which is part of what led us to ask those questions in the first place.
Yeah. Well, you just mentioned, I love that term, ethical non-monogamy, and it almost leads to the expansion from soul mate to soul partnership, because mate, maybe just in the context I'm thinking of, makes it think of a person.
Right.
Where soul partnership, it's like, well, you can be a partner with anybody, right? Yep. And that kind of adds to that ethical non-monogamy, polyamory kind of concept that is becoming more accepted, I think, as a cultural option for people. I think it's really hard for. So my ex and I, we talked about polyamory, and I think what we really kind of came with is like, where I'm at in my journey right now, I haven't conquered my upbringing to allow myself the space to think about polyamory without becoming jealous. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to know, about yourself, because like the tourist effect, which we'll talk about in a second. It's like, yeah, why not? You think about it. It's like, oh, you have multiple sex partners, and we just have sex all the time, and just it's that. Yeah. But that's probably very far from what it actually is, right? And
talk all the time. Lots of talking.
Lots of communication.
Lots of compromising. But I think that beautiful combination of words, soul partnership, allows the opportunity to think about the relationships you have rather more open. Not open as in like sexually open, but open as in like break the borders down of what the definition you have of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Rather than like soulmate, which is maybe something we've grown up hearing a lot. Right. So was polyamory something that you guys explored after you got back together, or was that something you were exploring before you guys kind of went through this, kind of exploration patch?
We've kind of had different phases of it, but before I answer that question, I do just want to go back to, like, it feels like we're at the beginning of our conversation again right now, to drugs.
Yeah.
It's like drugs and polyamory. It's like the social conditioning, the fear, the way that we've been taught. Like, it's kind of the same thing I've had to unwind for myself. The religious upbringing, the, having to have a real and authentic conversation with my mom. Mom, I'm doing drugs and sitting with people in medicine spaces, and also, yeah, that's Jared's girlfriend, or whatever. It's like being the bringer of hard conversations. But it's interesting that it's like the same. Like, I just love the way you phrase that. It's like I had to work through still am working through a lot of that for myself. But to answer your question, we've gone through phases of different explorations, including. Before we ever broke up, of opening up our marriage and exploring. And I think at the time thinking that was mostly related to my sexuality and wanting me to be fully expressed and connected. And before I had met Jared and started dating him, I mostly had dated women. Mm-hmm. And so, and then there's a whole thing and a falling in love and I don't think we can do this and a breakup and a coming back together. And it was like, okay, now what do we want it to look like?
Right.
Like, how do we, and in that time frame, there's just been so many people at the forefront, making this conversation available, doing the work to make sure people understand about attachment and about trauma and about, it's like all of that is jumbled up in there, including the realness to be, like, I still get jealous, just so you know.
Okay, right,
And
I love that honesty, definitely.
Yeah, just like to be able to have those real conversations, and now we're kind of at another point of exploring, like, what does this look like?
Right. Yeah. And it brings up this idea in my head, just as you mentioned that, Laurie, is what other narratives are we living by that are just completely just toxic and maybe not toxic, but haven't been thought through by the individual fully, right? You know, we talked about cannabis usage, one sexual partner usage ideas. You know, what else is out there that we've just kind of like blindly indoctrinated to? And like, you know, vaccines could be one, you know, I'm not trying to politicize any of this stuff, but, you know, it's like when we can step back and ask ourselves some of these questions and say, like, what am I nonsensically just going along with?
Right.
You know, and it doesn't mean you have to like start driving on the fucking left side of the road. You know,
Right.
I mean, Jesus, we have laws for a reason, but have you actually explored what that means to you?
Right.
You know, and it's just as you know, I've got two young girls, not so young anymore, 20 and 15, and I remember the first time that I was like, shit, I don't know what to do as a father, and this is kind of one of those times of like, you know, am I encouraging a narrative I'm gonna have to reverse later on? Maybe, you know, hopefully I'm not knowingly doing it. But I remember I went to a feminist class at University of Washington years ago when my kids were smaller, and one of the things they talked about was the amount of Photoshop and airbrush usage, right, on all these pictures and magazines and billboards, all this stuff. And the point this teacher made was, you know, the people that we have on advertising are what we as a society have deemed the pretty people, right? You're the prettiest male, you're the prettiest female, whatever. But those people are still airbrushed. Those people are still photoshopped. And so even the prettiest people that we deem pretty are still not pretty enough. So like that's a narrative, right?
Yeah.
That maybe I'm not out there telling my kids, hey, make sure you get that tummy tuck or fucking boob job, right? No, I'm never going to say that, but is the dialogue that I'm encouraging echoing that narrative? You know, so it's like, man, like, I don't want to pick apart life, but at the same time, like, are we conscious enough and aware enough as we start to continue to move through these narratives to start to pull out these things and be like, oh, ooh, that's a big one. Sexuality, oh my God, you know, only boys and girls, only men and women, only women and men, no boys and boys, no girls and girls, you know, no women to men, men to women, you know, it's all this pattern stuff that our brain has kind of gotten into that we're unpacking, and it's kind of awkward. It's kind of weird, you know, and medicine usage, you know, different types of sexualities, all this stuff is going to be a big thing for the next foreseeable future.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
so I think it's great that you guys are doing this kind of work and opening up people's minds to the ideas that there are different narratives, you know, and sometimes we don't know. It might be so far out of our thought process that we can't even fathom thinking about it. So it takes somebody else that's living their own human experience to embrace the human experience they're working through, so that maybe they can be the unwilling, unbeknownst examples that other people can look at and be like, oh yeah, okay, I guess it's not as hard as I thought it'd be. Yeah. What's next for you guys? What's on the horizon?
Well, we are very excited about the shape our couples work is taking. We mentioned rivers earlier, but we live kind of at the confluence of the Snoqualmie and the Skycomish up on the hill there.
Beautiful.
And that has been inspiring a lot of what we're now calling confluence couples. So we're getting ready for some of that. And honestly, I'm getting ready for the darkness.
Are you going to darkness?
No. I mean, with the changing of the seasons.
Oh, I was like, ooh, you're doing a darkness.
I do want to talk to you about that. I have 1,000 questions for you.
Yeah,
but yeah, looking forward to the changing of the season and kind of deepening into what else wants to be born.
Yeah. Do you guys see an uptick in your kind of work when the seasons change? We get more into that darkness up here in the Pacific Northwest.
I mean, summer is always hard for anyone to schedule anything.
Totally.
So,
Yep.
so yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's such like an outward focus, whereas once the light starts fading, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, the natural turn inward and questioning things and just being a place where there's 4 seasons, I think people are in much more of an energetic rhythm. You know, we both grew up in California and felt a lot more monotone. But yeah, I definitely think people are more comfortable and inclined to go in and looking in, and and some people struggle with doing that in ways they're not supported. But
Right.
yeah, I do find that it's a good time just to sync with the natural cycles happening outside, that in that darker period that we're doing things like medicine work.
Yeah.
Not to say it's not great in the summer, and it has its own space, but it's a different flavor.
Yeah, there's an interview I've rewatched over the past few years, but it's from the early '90s. Chris Cornell's being interviewed by Kurt Loder, right? So
Nice.
dating myself 100% there. Kurt Loder, the former MTV jockey.
Yep.
And they were talking about the birth of grunge and where it came from and how this creativeness came from this area.
Yeah.
Right? And Chris Cornell said, it was very profound. It was like, well, take a place like Denver or, San Diego. It's nice all the time. So people are out there seizing the day. They're riding their bikes, they're taking their hikes, they're surfing, they're doing all this stuff. They're outdoors doing things.
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest is nasty a lot of the time. So we're inside with our Marvin Gaye and our Melvins records and our acoustic guitars and our dirty pedals, and we're just making all this stuff up because we have to go inside. We have to be creative because we can't be outside. And it is that going inside and that excuse to have the darkness and that excuse to be cold and that excuse to kind of like go in and do some internal work. I think is a beautiful thing because most of the big work that I've done personally has been in the wintertime, whether now I plan it that way. In the past, it's just happenstance.
Right.
But, Darkness Retreat, my meditations, Vipassanas has always been in like the February, January, big parkas, put the hood on, wrap up a scarf. Nobody can see me. I'm crying. I'm doing my thing. But I think there is something with that darkness and that time of the year where we follow the times of the year.
Yeah.
And we're being okay with being inside and doing some of that internal work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So about you, Jared, where's your work taking you?
Yeah, I'm really continuing and excited to be blending different modalities. I think that's, some people go deep in one modality and they're all about it, and that like the depth is their gift. And I increasingly find that my gift is more finding the gaps between modalities and how to bridge them and how to mix and match things. I suggested, I mentioned that I was blending some shamanic journeying with soulcraft, with nature connection, with medicine work. So I'm just continuing to do that and, have specific teachers that I'm working with to go deeper in each of those modalities. But yeah, it's like being a kid with a chemistry set. It's like super fun to like mix these two together and see what happens. And, and I have a small crew of guinea pigs, which I'm happy to add you to, that I'm like, hey, I want to try something. Like, come over. And, I recently made my first drum, and I've been really getting into drumming and the trance that's possible through drumming and the ancient humanness of that. And so I got this new drum, and I was like, well, I don't really want to just break this out with a paying client that I've never done this with a client before. So I had a good friend come over, and I drummed for him while we did a cannabis session, and he had some really good feedback. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, don't drum so loud for this, and it makes a difference here. And so yeah, I'm just excited to keep blending things and doing more couples work with Confluence couples, and and I'm doing more and more men's work, which is really exciting, and playing with some offerings in that realm as I keep going deeper in that work and explore what's needed and what actually encourages men to do the work.
Right.
That seems to be one of the harder parts in that industry.
Yeah, I feel that. Well, where can people find you guys?
Yeah, we have confluencecouples.com that is out, and then Laurie has her website, which is
LaurieArchbold.com.
And I have my website, which is jaredarchbold.com, and you can find all of our socials and all of that from there.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll leave links in the show notes for ways to get in touch with you guys. I feel like we can probably talk for another hour or two, and I've got some notes for future conversations. So, but for this conversation, just thankful so much for you guys for being here, for sharing your journeys, for being as open as you can be about the lives that you're living. I know that's can be vulnerable at times, but I think personally what I found with my own personal life is the more vulnerable I am, the more, not payback is the right word, but the more like reciprocity is there, right?
Yeah.
And you we might not intend to be an example or set out to be an example, but I think the more authentic you live your life, you tend to be somebody's example.
Yeah.
And so, don't seek it out for that reason, but there's a reason that you've lived the life you're living and continuing to live that life. So be proud of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. Beautiful. Thanks for having us. Thanks for your curiosity and care.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
we'll see you soon, guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for spending time with Jared, Laurie, and myself. Please check out the show notes for ways to get in touch with them, to explore more of their offerings, or to book a session with them. Obeisance and love. We'll see y'all next time.